Hi, Tim.
Good afternoon.
Okay, good. You can hear me. For a minute, I thought I had no. Okay, that's good. Okay.
Let's see if we get anybody else today.
Come on, hon.
Okay.
Double
Hi,
the,
Tim.
double the class.
Good afternoon.
Would you like an orange?
Oh, can you pass it through the phone or the computer screen?
Virtually. Ah,
Oh, we
that's
got someone else coming in here. That's good.
Who's the new person?
The new
Hello
person.
there.
You need to unmute yourself.
Hi.
There, I guess there, Matthew Roman, afternoon.
Hi, I'm Tim. Hey, how are you?
Hey, Tim.
You got an email from me this week, so glad you could join us. It looks like it might be a really small group, but that's okay.
Tim,
Yes.
you had said somewhere, I made a note, that when God was making the world and it came to Tuesday, did he say good day or something? He mentioned Tuesday twice. Oh,
Not ringing a bell, I must say right now.
well, is Tuesday somehow mentioned twice on things rather than how other days are once?
Are you talking about like when we're counting the days of the week?
No, I don't know. It was either you or the rabbi. I
Must
have
have been the rabbi, because in the days of the week in Judaism, the way it works is they really don't even have names. They are just numbers, you know.
Really?
So, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I thought I made a note here that Tuesday was mentioned twice, and that made it like a more.
Well, you may have come up in something with the rabbi, you know, he loves all that, like things that get repeated in the Torah and all of that kind of thing. He's really into that. But it's not ringing a bell with me in any of the Torah discussions we've had recently, but you know.
Well, it wasn't Tuesday a market day, or was it which day?
Well, I believe it's also a Torah reading day.
Okay.
Additionally, the Torah was read publicly on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
Okay.
So that may be something to do with it as well.
Okay.
Because it was a Torah reading day. Okay, it's 1:03. I'm giving everybody 2 more minutes in case somebody's going to check in late. Then we'll get started with what we've got today.
Another look. Did Keith say he was coming now? Yeah.
So have you ever attended a Torah study session before?
I have not.
Okay, well, you know, basically you understand that the Torah is divided into weekly readings. So there's a section that's read each week, Saturday service in the synagogue, of course, now virtual services. And so from the beginning, which we actually start the new cycle of Torah readings on a holiday called Simchat Torah, which is coming up toward the mid-October time. You actually end the Torah reading and start the new cycle. So throughout the year, you have read from the beginning, Genesis or Bereshit, all the way through Deuteronomy, or in Hebrew, Devarim. And by each section week, then the holidays have their own special Torah portions as well. Some of them can be pretty lengthy, so you can't really like do a sermon or what we call a Devar Torah on the whole portion, because you'd have to keep people for hours and hours and hours. Nor do they read the whole Torah portion in synagogue, because it would take forever. So the rabbi will choose a section of the Torah to read or chant, and then from there, whatever he's reading or chanting, or she is reading and or chanting, they'll pull some idea and do a Devar Torah or a sermon on that. So we are actually, right now, we're in the final book of the Torah. We're in Deuteronomy, or as I said, Devarim, which is what it's called in Hebrew. We'll be reading in this up until Simchat Torah, where we'll finish Deuteronomy, and then we go right back and start again with Genesis or Bereshit.
Gotcha. And that varies from Daf Yomi, if that's the Talmud, correct, over the 7-year cycle.
That is the Talmud, yes. The Torah reading cycle is a yearly reading cycle. Daf Yomi, the Talmud is extensive. So you pick something within there, and then you have this study session that you do with, oftentimes with a little group of people that runs throughout a year. But that's a whole different thing from Torah. Now, if you were going to be an Orthodox Jew, you would do both. You would study Torah, you would study Talmud. A lot of Reform Jews don't study Talmud that much. They'll take a Talmud class here and there with a rabbi. It's studying Talmud is tough. It's tough. There's a lot there. All right, I'm going to get started with what I have this week. So we start with a little Devar Torah first that I'll read, and then we can talk and discuss. We do our blessing over Torah study the first.
Oh no. Tim froze.
Okay. Commanding us to engage with the words of Torah. So we are, we have Rena. Welcome, Rena. We are in the book called Deuteronomy, as I said, and this particular Torah portion is called Shoftim. Shoftim in Hebrew means judges. And justice and judges and the work that judges do back in the days of the early days of our people with the Israelites was just as important as what judges do today. I mean, they have a very, very special place. So this week's Torah portion speaks a great deal about setting up a system of leadership or a system of government, if you will, in order to create a just and fair society, as the Israelites are finally going to set foot, finally, in the land of Canaan after all of the wandering in the desert. And remember, Moses is still speaking to them. Moses will not be going with them, but he is still speaking to them, reminding them of all the things that they need to do. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. They are commanded this. And this is perhaps one of the most often quoted verses from the Torah. It is displayed on wall hangings. It's used in Jewish art. And it is proclaimed by activists. Frequently, activists will put it on their signs because it's so important if you are marching as a cause for justice. And why is the word tzedek, which means justice, repeated? Well, isn't it just okay to say justice? Why do we have to say justice, justice? Well, as most Torah scholars will say, and as our Rabbi Haas says as well, there's an emphasis here. When you have a word repeated, there's an emphasis to the repetition in the Torah. It's not just there because somebody thought it sounded good, it wasn't an accidental sort of thing, but it's important. And the idea of justice is very important. So the repetition here is a reminder to the Israelites that justice must permeate all aspects of their lives. And not just in legal matters when they're standing in a court of law, but also in matters of everyday life and in religious matters as well. We are commanded to be just in our dealings with our neighbors, our dealings with our business associates. We are commanded to be just with those even who break the law. Because if we're not, then we are not truly pursuing justice.
Hey.
According to a Hasidic interpretation, the repetition may also mean that justice is not a static thing. It just doesn't sit there. The pursuit of justice is ongoing. It must be pursued under any circumstance, bar none. No other people on this earth are so commanded by their God to pursue justice as we are, the Jews. In fact, the word tzedek and its derivative, tzedakah, appear 43 times throughout the 5 books of the Torah. So that's pretty incredible when you stop to think about it. And this emphasizes again and again that the Israelites, and today, we as Jews today as well, have a strong commitment to justice. And as true with any society, a system of leadership that is just, that is compassionate, that is righteous, is essential to the success of that civilization. Parashat Shoftim sets out clear guidelines to the Israelites about how to structure and to create their leadership, their government. And it is a plan that sets forth kind of checks and balances, if you will, which we know we have in our US government as well, so that no one particular leader or no one particular group within leadership can wield so much power, thereby abusing their power over the other members within the society. Interestingly enough, there are American history scholars who believe that the founders of our own United States were guided by these Torah principles when they set forth the foundation and workings of our American governmental system. And while pursuing justice certainly sounds like a very noble cause, pursuing justice is oftentimes not easy. Now I'm going to use an illustration from my own life. I actually used this once before in a Devar Torah, so if you heard it before, just bear with me, but maybe you weren't in synagogue that Saturday. So I was teaching AP composition to 12th grade students, and I was very lucky to do that because they were pretty amazing, let me tell you. I had to mete out justice in a rather unfortunate way. It was the spring of the year, so school is getting ready to wind down, and as they were seniors, they got to wind down a little bit earlier than everybody else. And I had assigned the students to choose a film. Could have been an old film, recent film. I was pretty wide open with that. They did have to have it approved by me, so they had to let me know which film they were choosing. And then, of course, they had to sit down and they had to watch it. I asked them then, once they had watched their selected film, to write an essay that would explicate the philosophy that was inherent in the film's message. They were required to use specific examples of scenes from the film, dialogue from the film to support their thesis, whatever it might turn out to be. I gave them 2 weeks to complete the assignment, which I thought was pretty fair. And on the due date, because these were AP kids trying their best to make sure they had good grades, everyone turned in a completed essay. I rarely had students in AP who did not do their work. Unfortunately, Jordan, and that's his real name, but I will not say his last name, an engaging student who could be quite the jokester in class and who worked hard most of the time, chose to plagiarize his essay. Not a wise move. AP students had signed an honor code at the start of the academic year. It was required by the school. They knew that plagiarism was a serious matter that would not be tolerated. And as much as I liked Jordan, and I really did, he was a fun kid to have in class, I was required, because as teacher with an honor code, I had to report his plagiarism to the principal, in fairness to all the other students who had done the work, honestly, and in upholding, as a faculty member, the honor code of the school. His unwise decision would put his attendance at prom, which was about 6 weeks away, and graduation exercises, as well as what was most important to Jordan, his place on the soccer team would all be in jeopardy. It was justice. I had a pit in my stomach carrying it out. I didn't feel good having to do this, but it needed to be handled. Justice in this case was not easy for me to pursue. Trust me, it really wasn't. But as Rabbeinu Behaya stated, justice under any circumstance, whether to your profit or loss. My hands were tied. On a side note, if you want to know how things turned out for Jordan, as you probably do, Jordan had to go with his mother in front of the principal, and I was required to be there. He could plead his case to the principal. I merely explained what had happened, and I had the proof of the plagiarism, so it was right there in stark black and white, and it was ultimately up to the principal to decide what to do. I was summarily dismissed from the room because I had done my part, and now it was all in the hands of the principal of the school. And I will tell you this, the story does not have a very happy ending. Jordan was expelled.
Oh my goodness.
Expelled. And like I said, we were in the spring of the year, there wasn't that much school. Jordan cleaned out his locker. He was not permitted to attend prom. He was not permitted to attend graduation because he plagiarized. Our school took it seriously. They knew, the students knew this. The principal was pretty firm, and I don't know what was said between them in the office because I was not there. I only found out that this was the case. And of course, I no longer had this child in my class. So we'll come talk about that more later. On a much grander scale, beyond a teacher in a classroom, this Torah portion reveals to us a sort of different side of God, because we've been talking about God being so vengeful and so angry in so much of the Torah discussion that we've had. And as we discuss this in past Torah study sessions, some of us are bothered by this rather angry and vengeful God that we see in the Torah. One whose wrath seems to be very easily cultivated. But in this portion, we kind of see a softer side or a more benevolent side of God when he is instructing the Israelites in, interestingly enough, he's talking to them about war. God makes it clear that some form of offer of peace must be presented to an enemy encampment so as to prevent any war at all, if possible. So the Israelites would have to go with an offer of peace in an effort to say, if we can avoid war, let's avoid war. In other words, it wasn't a matter of war at all costs. In the event, though, that a war did in fact occur, if a peace could not be brokered, God makes it clear that complete and total devastation is not the main objective. And God specifically points out, sparing, interestingly enough here too, vegetation. Vegetation, and particularly spare the trees, because the trees are often fruit-bearing and they provide nutrition. So you need to make sure that you do as little damage as possible. God also, in a more benevolent sort of manner, makes it clear in this Torah portion that no criminal should ever face a sentence of death on the testimony of a mere singular witness. That just doesn't fly with justice when it comes to this serious sort of a death sentence. It takes the testimony of a minimum of 2 witnesses, and better off even 3. Otherwise, a sentence of death may not be the penalty for the crime. God further orders that cities of refuge must be maintained for those who may need some shelter from vengeance. So we see some elements of benevolence in God here, rather than the quick to anger kind of God that we've seen in the past. So all of this makes it very clear that justice and fair play are the overarching ideas in this particular Torah portion. Quite clearly, justice is the bedrock of any successful, thriving, compassionate, and functioning societies. And in some ways, this call to justice embodies the essence of what we as Jews strive to be in the world. In the words of the prophet Micah, we are to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Justice often requires or depends on mercy. The two go hand in hand. And if we look to the Torah for guidance and seek answers in meditation and prayer, we are fulfilling Micah's teaching and living the meaning of what Judaism is truly supposed to be. So that's what I have for you. I'll open it up to questions or ideas or anything anybody wants to throw out there. Feel free. Don't be shy.
Oh, so Tim, I understand what happened to Jordan, but if he had, I do and I don't, but if he had extreme regrets and felt awful, could it have been offered to him that he had done some other penance and rewritten, his essay totally on his own?
I suppose, but again, that was not my judgment call.
No, not yours. I'm just saying, I mean.
That would have been the principal, I suppose, maybe discuss things with him when I wasn't there, the circumstances, whatever. I did, like I said, I was not privy to that part of the conversation. I suppose there could have been different things. I don't know if there were other things that Jordan had issues with and had been before the principal that were not of my class. But for whatever reason, when the principal was meting out what he thought justice should be in this case, he thought expulsion was the course of action.
I wonder what happened to him, because, that at that time really ruined his life.
Well, what I found out happened to him, because being a teacher and I was pretty much I was tough, I was stern, I was strict, but I was benevolent at the same time. I always told my students on the first day of school, this is a dictatorship. My classroom is a dictatorship, and I make no bones about that, and I am the dictator. I can be a very benevolent dictator, or I can be a very iron-fisted, very, unbending. I always said, it depends on you. I put it right back on the students. If you cooperate, do what I ask you to do, work hard, I can be as benevolent as possible while still being a dictator. So I looked into Jordan because I did feel bad. Jordan had to quickly register in a different school. And so he was able to complete his degree, his high school diploma and graduate. After that, I don't know. I don't know after that. I did not maintain touch with him after school, but he did get another school. He did graduate, so at least that happened for him.
Do you know if that would affect his getting into a good college? Would that be a public record? What happened?
If the school would say, why did you leave? Or they would inquire as to why were you forced to leave a school 7 weeks before the end of the term, and it was a plagiaristic thing, I don't know that it would look good to a college. I'm just going to say that. I will tell you right now, if I'm looking at entering, I'm the dean of a college, and I'm looking at prospective students, and I see plagiarism, that student's not going to go in the A pile.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
You're the only witness. So do you think that there were not enough witnesses in this case to carry out a just punishment? You needed to find someone else to corroborate the plagiarism.
I had corroboration. It's exactly what you're looking at now. A lot of students don't realize how a teacher can spot plagiarism literally in a matter of 30 seconds. They have these things on computers, which we had at school. It still exists today. It's a program that you download,
Oh,
and it's called turnitin.com.
I have that for my IT students.
Right. If you suspect that a student has plagiarized, and I knew right away, I started reading this essay. I knew immediately this was not this kid's work. I had had this kid in class for, 7 months now. I knew what kind of work he did. I knew what he was capable of. I knew right away I was not reading his work. So I go to turnitin.com. I typed in a random sentence from maybe the 3rd paragraph of this young man's essay, and within seconds, whoop, comes up on my screen the essay that he plagiarized from. And I mean, it was about 99% plagiarized. There were a couple slight tweaks that he made. And so what I did is I printed it out, the essay from the internet, and I had his essay, and I took a yellow highlighter and I highlighted all the sections that were copied from the internet essay. And when I had to confront Jordan on this first before further. So when he walked into my room, I called him down to my room during a homeroom period, because I didn't have a homeroom because I was English department chair, and that was a perk. Woohoo. And I pulled the 2 pages. I gave him a chance. I said to him, I said, Jordan, is there anything you want to tell me about the essay that you wrote? And he kind of hemmed and hawed and whatever. And, the kid was a jokester, so he tried to tell a couple jokes, and this isn't gonna work. I gave him a second. I was playing baseball with him. I gave him a second chance. I said, are you sure there's nothing you want to tell me about the essay that you turned into me? Oh, no. He's having and hawing around again. Well, okay, like in baseball, 3 strikes, you're out. Yeah. So finally, number 3, I just opened my desk drawer and I just presented him. I had one essay in one hand, one essay in the other hand, and he couldn't deny it. There was the proof. There was the evidence.
You bring up a couple of really good points that I thought of when I was looking at this a few weeks ago. And number 1, having the technology to determine that a wrongdoing was made is because we are in this environment, because we have a civilization, a stable place. And the Jews during their 40 years in the wilderness were still able to enact justice. They had a system of justice there, and now it's changing now that they've come to the Jordan River and are ready to move into their land. And another thing is the levels of justice, like that you're giving him the baseball 3 strikes. If someone committed a wrongdoing out in the desert, in the wilderness, I was like, all right, you're out. You're out of this tribe. You got to go that way. We're going this way. Just because of the level of survival is just a totally different ballgame.
Well, and I think you make a good point. I want to say something about your idea of the witnesses. Realize that without the technology that the Israelites clearly did not have in the desert, or as they were ready to step foot into the promised land, the idea of having 2 witnesses makes a lot of sense. They didn't have a computer they could go to help them. They didn't have modern forensics like, detectives and police force have today. So the idea of 2 people having to bear witness against somebody, in a way, was a good check and balance, so that we couldn't be just the hearsay of one person.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to. Yes.
Poor Tim. Tim, I have another question. I think I've asked this before. Was God telling Moses all these things and talking through him to the people? Was he wasn't directly talking to the Israelites, God.
No, the Israelites were here. Yeah, but Moses had Moses, from what we're told in the Torah, from what we know in the Torah, and again, it's open to how this actually occurred. I wasn't there, so I don't know. But that Moses actually spoke. Remember, he couldn't look at God. Remember the Torah where God said, "You'll see my back, but that's all of me that you're going to see." But he did hear the voice of God.
Right.
Ergo, we are supposed to believe that what Moses, this this grand speech that Moses gives at the end of the Torah here, which is what encompasses most of Deuteronomy, is his telling and retelling the people, these are the things that God told me I need
Yeah.
to tell you if you
Okay.
want to have a just, fair, and compassionate society.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That clears things up, you know.
Bossy, you had a question?
Two quick questions. One, I feel with the plagiarism, being a former teacher, that the class learned from it too. They realized this was a rule. They followed the rule. He broke it, and you mean business. And it's sometimes very, very hard, even when you're a parent, and you have to be very careful. Don't do this or I'll, because once you say that, you're locked into that punishment. All right. So I think it was a win. I feel for Jordan, but it was a win situation there. But going back to your comment about justice, you should pursue, and mentioning repetition. Are there many places in the Torah? I'm trying to think of, in my mind, Kadesh, with our going up, we repeat 3 times, don't we?
Right.
There.
Right.
Are there many times that repetition is used for an effect?
Right, repetition. It can, I mean, even today, writers today will use repetition to emphasize, to create a certain effect in even in fiction or whatever they're writing. It does occur at other points in the Torah. I remember discussing when we were still doing Torah study at the synagogue with Rabbi Haas before we had to vacate, you know, coming against other passages where a word would be repeated. And of course, we know there's repetition of stories in the Torah. We know there's 2 creation stories, there's 2 flood stories, you know, and they don't mesh and they don't jive. Repetition, as a former writing teacher, when I was teaching AP composition, I would, and especially in speech making, repetition, because the ear starts to pick up on a rhythm. It starts to hear a certain sentence structure, and then it tunes into that. It's like repeating the chorus of a song almost. So there is an emphasis. I mean, one of the most brilliant things that I used to use when I used to teach speech writing to kids is we would read the classic Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, because it uses repetition so effectively. I mean, I would have them find elements of repetition. So in the Torah, we have it because it is an emphasis, but I also like the Hasidic idea that justice is repeated because justice is ongoing. It's not just justice and it stops. It's justice. So it's because even the concept of justice has changed throughout the years. There's basic elements of justice that we all still agree on, but we don't require do we require 2 witnesses anymore to a crime? Well, I don't know that that's in the code of law for any particular detective agency or police force or whatever. But like I said, we have modern technology, which kind of becomes a second witness, if you will, as to perhaps a personal witness. It's just something that doesn't stay static. Justice must keep moving forward. Justice is something that we must pursue all the time in pretty much all matters of our life.
Tim, how did someone become a judge?
Back in the days we're talking about here with the Torah,
Yes.
I think what it was they just chose those who were learned, those who were intelligent, those who were leaders of the different tribes, and they were appointed because Moses would pick people out and appoint them to certain positions, even as they were wandering through the desert to be leaders and judges. There was no, specific schooling necessarily back then like we have today, where you can go and get a law degree, et cetera, et cetera. It was just those who seemed to be wise. I would think you might want judges also with a certain kind of temperament, people who can be fairly calm and fairly controlled. So Moses would probably look to that as well, as what is the temperament of this person? Can they keep a level head and think clearly, even if something is very wrong? But they didn't have they didn't have a Hebrew university back then to go to.
No.
I find that those qualities endure into what we consider to be a good judge of justice in today's society?
Well,
Yes.
I
Or
think
for everyone,
I think so. I mean, if we had justices sitting on the bench who would fly off the handle all the time, I don't know how, and they have to do a lot of listening and taking in. I mean, look at Judge Judy. Hey, he's Mishpaka, so let's be careful there. But I think a judge also, another thing that I think would make a good judge is a judge has to have a certain sense of humor too.
Yeah, and some of them don't.
I mean, and I will say that as a teacher, because I think teachers sometimes we have to be judges too. And I always tell people if they're thinking about going into a career in teaching, you have to have patience. If you don't have patience, you got to have patience, and you have to have a sense of humor. You really, really do. If you can't laugh at yourself, you're never going to make it either. Because regardless of what age group you're teaching, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school, kids at different ages have very bizarre senses of humor, but you have to be able to appreciate that, and you have to go right back with them, even if you think it's really silly. So I would want to judge with a sense of humor too, I think.
Yeah. Tim, from this Torah portion, I truly believe that our judicial system took this from the beginnings, from the Torah. I mean, a lot of, I don't know if there's any proof that, when it first started, but I truly believe that that's where they got their platform from.
Well, there are many American history scholars, and I have read this in more than one, example of a book that's detailing early American history, the writing of the Constitution, the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And these were learned people. These were people who had studied. And remember, I think we had one other Torah study, or maybe it came up in one of the classes. Many of the people that were learned people back then learned Hebrew and knew Hebrew.
Really?
And so it would make sense that they would look to the Torah for some element of guidance. And many people do believe that the Torah influenced these founding documents of our nation. And you can see it in this particular Torah portion, as you can in other portions of the Torah as well. I mean, so there was a mark. I mean, it is Judaism's holy scripture, holy book, but it has had influence beyond Judaism. And of course, it's even though it is our Torah, it is still canonized and looked upon by other religions, by Christianity. It is part of their scripture and Bible as well.
So then would the Constitution have not been handed down with Jesus, by Jesus?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the one thing people forget very
All right, that
clearly
was my joke of the day, given that I know some people believe that the Constitution was written by Washington and Jesus.
Really? But think about it. If okay, this is a little off topic, but Jesus was Jewish, so he taught Judaism. When he was preaching to the people, he was preaching what he knew, and he knew Judaism because he lived as a Jew, he died as a Jew. People forget that,
Right.
And when they talk about, I just read a very interesting essay this past week from, it was a politician, so take it with a grain of salt, but who says that we have to stop using the term Judeo-Christian, that we just have to stop that term. It just has to go away. And his argument was that they're not enough alike that we should hyphenate them. There's Judaic background, there's Christian background, but Judeo-Christian, he says, is just a feel-good kind of term. I don't know that I agree with them, but it was an interesting essay.
What about Muslim background?
Any comments, questions? Let's go. Somebody throw something really scathing out on the table.
Well, going back.
I'm leaving you all speechless this week.
Going back to, well, I didn't have time to read the passages specifically this week, unfortunately.
So it's one of my, actually this Torah portion is one of my favorite Torah portions. I mean, if it's possible to have favorite Torah portions, I personally like this one because it's getting into really the nitty gritty of forming a society and forming a civilization, which is what, the Israelites are about to do. you know,
Right.
and a civilization that needs to have justice as well as many other qualities. And even with all the Hazarai that happened in the desert, where, you know, they would go against God and God would get angry, and they built the golden calf, and then they're whining and kvetching about the food, and they're whining and kvetching, I want to turn around and go back to Egypt.
I have a
In the end, what happens is, you know, when they finally get to the border of the promised land and they're listening to Moses before they step into it, they are ready, they are able, all of this was learning experiences, they are ready and able to set up a workable society that can function. Not that there's not going to be problems, because we know there are, but and the fact that it still exists today, the fact that we are still here today, we are still reading the Torah, we are still looking at it for its lessons, its elements of wisdom, the guidance that it can give to us. So I would say that, you know, in spite of all the various ups and downs and foibles along the way, it ended up turning out pretty well overall. You know.
So I think you touched on the point of how the type of justice changed as it transitioned from wandering into becoming society. And right now we are seeing justice transition as we go from the courtroom to Zoom justice because of quarantining, and in a way that was already happening with the court of public opinion and Twitter, people having their form of justice through through consensus that way. And so we're already seeing that what is justice and who gets to dole out justice has been changing as we transition through that medium. And, but like, how do we make sure to keep the justice that we've learned from Torah in our back of our minds as we move into this next phase of how we run it?
Well,
You know, oh, Tim, justice is has not always been done in the right way. Through the centuries and years, many societies forgot about it. You know, you had judges in Spain, you know, during the
Inquisition.
what's the word?
The
Inquisition.
Inquisition.
Yeah, and I mean, you had a lot of societies who they were just well, even in, I want to say, even in today's society with the book To Kill a Mockingbird, or you know how people felt, it wasn't always true justice, and you can see it through many, many years and centuries. It's about really trying to hold on to it, you know.
Well, I think that's true. I think justice, like anything else out there in society, can become and does become corrupted at times. Like you said, the Inquisition. You can look at decisions that were handed down that were clearly racially biased. You can look at the Salem witch trials, where, you know,
Right.
the justices at that period were clearly, I don't know what planet they were living on, but it was far away from justice. And then let's
Right.
look at today, to Ace's point. We're forced now, very much by the pandemic, to become ever more dependent on the technology. Yes, thank God we have it. Yes, it has allowed us to stay in touch with people in a different way, but at least we can see them, we can talk with them, check up on them. But it also, you mentioned like Twitter. Okay, you talk about something like Twitter, you talk about something like Facebook and Twitter justice or Facebook justice. That scares me. That scares me greatly. The court of law, according to Twitter, or the court of law, according to Facebook, where anybody can go out and make, and they do. If you're on Facebook or you're on Twitter, you know it's true. People go out and make condemnations of things very easily, very quickly, before they have really done any research, before they have looked at any facts, or they quickly
Right.
repost something, or they retweet something, only to find out later that they should have been checking where the source of the information was from. And if that's a kind of justice that we're looking at for the future, I don't know whether we may be regressing rather than making progress anymore. You know, the justice of the Torah that depended on people having to witness and having to be there and a judge having to listen to the people and listen to the two stories or more from the witnesses and render a judgment that didn't depend on somebody tweeting, you know, and tweeting, and you can be so anonymous when you're tweeting. Nobody needs to know who you are. But if you're standing up and you're making an accusation in front of a human judge, and then the person who was allegedly guilty of whatever the crime is, and there's a reaction there that is person to person, that's a lot more difficult, more challenging, and you really better have your facts set, your ducks in a row, whatever you want to say, rather than hiding behind an anonymous Twitter handle or Facebook page or whatever, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, if we're going to use justice through electronics, and again, I mean, I know they're doing court cases electronically, I know it, and they have to right now for many reasons, you know, health being number one, but we have to, I think we also have to be very, very careful, because I'm seeing a lot of Twitter justice, a lot of Facebook justice, that just makes me shake my head and think, okay, but we're headed down a bad path here.
Maybe Jack Dorsey of Twitter should hire some rabbinic scholars to help moderate this.
Well, you know, very learned scholars could certainly kind of maybe get rid of some of the, for lack of a better word, garbage that's out there. You know,
Right.
I mean, we have to be careful. I mean, for me personally, I'm not a Twitter person. I don't tweet. I guess, is that what you say? You don't tweet or whatever? I don't tweet. I'm not a tweeter. I tried it for a while, but it wasn't for me. Facebook, yes, but you know, we are very careful about what we put on Facebook, and I don't ever post something unless I have checked the source of it. I just don't do it. Because I've seen too many of my friends, acquaintances who quickly react and then later get burned by it and then have to retract and, you know, whatever. It's like, I'm checking sources for everything I do. And I know there's a lot of sources that are far left and a lot of sources that are far right. And there are things that are centrist and slightly right or slightly left or whatever. The ones on the very fringes of either side, I kind of avoid, you know.
You're right, you're right.
You know,
You know, Tim, and I'm not talking about political, but I recently heard a speech that was really fabulous. And the speech also is repetition. And I think that really gets to people. They're really listening, you know, when you say something that, you know, repetition, repetition. I think that you hear it once, but, you know, when it's said during a speech, you know, interval, you know, a point to come across, it really stays in your head, you know.
well, yeah. Well, even if you're sitting in synagogue. Pardon me. Go ahead.
I was, you were saying, Rena, it reminded me of a book that I read a long time ago, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, where the narrator is a professor of rhetoric, and rhetoric is the study of like, making arguments, how to become more persuasive. And if justice is simply a matter of how good is your prose, or how well are you at speaking, like that was what the Greeks and the Romans did, like how, whether or not they could enact justice was how well they spoke to the crowd. And that's what I'm thinking, that's what we're kind of seeing right now with the Twitters, how they're speaking to the crowd is what that justice is. That's why we need documents like Torah, like the Constitution, to remind us this is
I think too, I mean, if you think about, if you're a lawyer in a courtroom, you know, when we get back to actually having court cases in person, but think back to even if you've read books that deal with court cases, a persuasive lawyer, which is pretty much one who can speak really, really well, use words, use language really, really well, can be far more persuasive than a lawyer who gets up, stumbles, fumbles, doesn't have that command of language. I mean, to me, it's almost like if you're going to be a lawyer and you're going to be a trial lawyer, you are going to argue cases in front of a judge and jury, you really need to have a really good background in English. It's almost like you have to have like a second major in English, because it's really going to very much hinge on how effectively you put words together, how effectively you are able to put your point across for your particular client or whatever. And I'm sure it was true in the days of the Torah. If you were standing before judges, how well you could present your case, how clearly you could present a case had a lot to do with whether you were going to be persuasive, whether you were going to be believed. I mean, language is persuasive. I mean, hours go into something as simple as an advertisement or a commercial on TV to get just the right words. What are just the right words to sell the product we're trying to sell? You know, saying something's new and improved, you know? So, you know, when they come out with new and improved Cool Whip, I don't even know if they still make Cool Whip, but anyway, if they come out with new and improved Cool Whip, okay, how is it new and improved? They don't really ever tell you. And I bet if you sit down with a tub of old Cool Whip and new and improved Cool Whip, you're not really going to notice a big difference. But somehow they give you words to think, oh, you know, so the next time you're walking down the aisle of Publix or Kroger or whatever your choice of grocery store is, you'll think about that product and stick it in the basket, and good for them. They succeeded. How did we
It's
get
persuasion, persuasion. You're
Yes,
right.
lucky.
A bet din, isn't that a special type of court?
Yes.
Now, those are not the same judges we're talking about here?
Well, a bet din is a religious court that deals with issues of religious matters, also deals with conversion of people to Judaism. I mean, you know that one of the steps you have to take if you convert to Judaism is you have to go at the end, before you do your mikvah and whatever, you sit before a bet din. And you have to, it will be a rabbi and others, obviously they have to be Jewish, knowledgeable people who just, and it's not like they're trying to trip you up or test you in a way that's going to make you feel uncomfortable, but just talk about, okay, the motivations and why, you know, choosing Judaism is important to you. But there are bet dins as well, especially among the Orthodox, where people will go to try to settle differences in terms of religious observance. You know, you could turn your neighbor in because, you know, I saw Mrs. Goldberg, she flipped the light switch on and it was 2 minutes after the beginning of Shabbos. So I don't know what we're supposed to do about that, you know? Well, my answer would be mind your own business, but but I mean, they adjudicate matters when it comes down to something dealing with a religious matter. I mean, obviously they are learned scholars and rabbis and people who have a good understanding of religious law. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch, which is, see you later, Ace, have a good day, Shabbat Shalom. But people who understand the Shulchan Aruch and how it applies to different situations, you know, because that's the codification of religious law that is, you know, as Reformed Jews, we don't really talk about it as much, but in Orthodox Judaism, it's extremely important that they will still consult as to what to do in a situation, you know, a religious situation. So you do have religious courts. Once upon a time, those religious courts also, if you go back to like when we did the class on Poland, for example, and different communities of Jews in Poland would have religious courts, and the local authorities would allow these religious courts to adjudicate matters within their community pretty much across the board. They had a lot more power than they do today. But they figured if you're the rabbis and you're dealing with your people, fine, you know, you decide what's right. You understand and you make the decision, you know. So, you know, there is a bet din. And like I said, it's still a part of the conversion process as well.
What does it translate to, bet din? How does it translate? What does it mean?
I believe it has to do something with house of judgment somehow.
House of judgment, yeah.
Okay.
You know, and that sounds like such a lofty term when you're thinking about someone who's converting or whatever, because we're not really sitting in judgment of anybody when we do a bet din. It's just a matter of, you know, you've expressed an interest to become Jewish, so let's just talk about it a little bit, you know, and before you take the final plunge, so to speak, in the mikveh.
Tim, do people, 2 questions. Do they go to bet din for a get? That's the first part. You know, does it get really hairy and they have to, you know, they would go to a bet din to get a get?
Yeah, in Orthodoxy, the get is still very much followed. So yes, a bet din would have a lot of control over that. So yeah, that would be a case where they step in because it's religious to the Jewish, the Orthodox Judaism, in terms of divorce.
And the other part is, say two very religious, Orthodox, Hasidic, whatever, one accused someone else of stealing or cheating. Could they go to the Bet Din before they went to actual police or, regular police or so? Could that be settled? Do you know?
It can be. If you've read different things about the Orthodox, or you look at the communities in New York and Brooklyn and whatever, they try to settle a lot of things before, because they don't really want to go out beyond their community. So they do try to settle things within their own community if they can. Ultimately, I mean, but it can get to be a problem, because we know now, unfortunately, and it's very sad and it's very bad, there has been a great deal of child abuse in the Orthodox community, but because they don't go to the civil authorities in the community, in the city, or the state, it gets kind of swept under the rug, because they don't really want it coming out publicly, unless a case gets so severe that somehow it does have to go to the civil authorities. But that's a case where they try oftentimes to settle things within their own community. And I'm not going to say that's good or bad, but I think there are times when you need to go to the civil law, because you're living in a country where we have a system of law that needs to be followed.
Oh, and they do, because I've seen many times, where unfortunately the shame of somebody doing something really bad, a religious person, that affects outside the community and other people.
Well, we have to remember that our religious figures, rabbis, if you're Jewish, priests, ministers, if you are Christian, imam, if you are Muslim, they're people. We forget that they're humans, they're people. We tend to maybe put them on a pedestal a bit, and we do look up to them. They do guide us. They offer us, a solace when we're in grief. They offer us advice if we're facing a crisis or something. But we always have to remember that they are people too, and they'll make mistakes just like we all do, and I think, we sometimes forget that, and we need to remember that, because we need to sometimes cut them some slack. I'm sure, as Rabbi Haas is always very positive, very outgoing, very seemingly happy, but I'm sure, like all of us, he's got his days.
Of course.
We all do.
Yeah, well, but some of them are so pious, and I don't want to get into that, and they are hypocrites. So, and some terrible things have happened where it's been national news.
It's been, and we can't really point the finger at any one religion. It's happened pretty much in most faith communities have had to deal with it.
I know.
So, and it's just a matter of, again, we are human, and if these people are doing something that is illegal, break the law, they need to answer for it and face the consequences or punishment as the courts see fit, like it would be for you or it would be for me. Yes, Flossie.
Is Deuteronomy one of the largest books of the Torah?
It tends to be, it's rather lengthy, which is why we're reading it for quite some time. Because it does, as I said when we started it, Deuteronomy kind of rehashes the whole Torah. Moses is going back through all the history which we've had in the Torah, and he's reminding the people. So we're getting the stories, obviously sometimes more compacted than we did originally, but it's still retelling and his constant reminders to them. You've got to follow the covenant. You can't break with God. If you break with God, bad things are going to happen to you. So he keeps, I've never sat down and counted, but how many times he tells the people in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses keeps saying, you've got to live up to the covenant. You've got to do what God is asking you in different terms maybe, but it just keeps coming up again and again. And there's a case of repetition. I think he's trying to drill it into their heads that, I keep reminding you, follow God, God was with you. I intervened for you at times with God. I won't be here to intervene for you anymore. So now it's up to you. And I think Moses is smart enough, I'm going to assume he's smart enough, that he knows there's going to be, slip-ups and backsliding a little bit here and there. But I think he also knows that if he keeps just drilling it into their heads, this is what God is asking of you. This is what God expects of you when he gives you this land, and you can have it. but you have to treat it with respect, and you have to do what God has been asking you to do.
Is it the last book of the Torah?
Yes. Once we finish Deuteronomy, which we will at Simchat Torah, then we go right back to Bereshit, to Genesis, and we start the cycle of readings all over again. Because remember, that's, I mean, Simchat Torah. Have you been in a congregation when they unroll the whole Torah?
Yes,
Which is
yes.
very cool. I mean, it's very cool to see, the whole Torah unrolled. And then 2 years ago at Mikveh Israel, I was tasked with the job of helping the rabbi as the people, and he was rolling it back up. I had the sorest arms the next day, I will tell you. Standing like this, helping him roll and helping him try to roll it tightly enough. I thought, I don't need to go to the gym for a while. This is good enough for the next week or so. But it's one of the coolest things to see, the entire Torah unrolled. And then traditionally what is supposed to happen is somebody reads the last 3 or 4 verses of Deuteronomy, immediately followed by somebody reading the first 3 or 4 verses of Genesis. So it's an unbroken cycle. We're finishing here, and then we go right back over here and read the beginning to show, that cycle that never ends of the Torah. And we just keep turning it and turning it and turning it, learning from it and studying it. And, because here we are talking about it today, it's 2020, on a August Friday, Shabbat. So.
Did you get an answer to, I was at one of your other classes regarding the second day of
I haven't yet. I told the rabbi I need to talk to him, but he's very, very right now enmeshed with High Holy Day preparations, and trying to pin him down for even a 20-minute conversation, even when I'm in the office, is sometimes right now a little challenging. I mean, we're all doing it in the office, but he especially, because, he's got to make sure everything is covered for all the services coming up. So I said, I told him, I said, I need to know some answers, but I understand you're really busy, but just know that we got to sit down and talk about this at some point.
Someone just told me recently of how the Orthodox are going and getting together for the High Holy services in Savannah. I forget who just called me, we're talking. And I am so proud of Mikvah not bucking under. The easiest thing is, well, we meet. No, I think it's wonderful that doing it virtually, it's for everyone's safety. And I think it's not in the first week of our going and being, quote, in this pandemic.
Right. Well, and I know, we still don't know when we can start getting back to in-person services. I think when we finally do start, and I have no idea when that is, so I have no inside information on that. I think when it does start, it'll probably be Friday night first.
Oh, yeah.
Because Friday night, first of all, fewer people would attend on Friday night, and it's a shorter service than the Saturday morning service. Remember, Saturday services require help with people coming up to the Bima and helping with the Torah and the readings and blessings and things. So you're going to have, it's a little more interactive service, whereas Friday night is much more, the rabbi's on the Bima leading the service. Kelly is, at her keyboard leading the singing and whatever. So it's easier to social distance on a Friday night service. And because the attendance is lower, social distance by, sitting in random pews so people aren't sitting right next to each other. So I really believe that when we go back to in-person services, it will probably start with Friday night Shabbat services first.
What is the drive-in Sukkot service that they're going to do?
Oh, what about it? What do you want to know about it? I know a little, I don't know a lot. We're going to, it's Christian Life Fellowship. It's on Montgomery.
Frozen.
Oh, he's frozen. He's frozen.
In this heat, it's not so bad, huh?
Look at that face. I don't know if he knows. Does he know?
Never seen you before. Are you visiting or?
Oh, sorry, there was a plane going by just a second ago.
Are you a member of Mikvah, or are you visiting, or we're glad to?
Looking to join, actually. I live here, so just kind of exploring a little bit.
Okay.
And that's good.
Okay, well,
Thanks.
we're all very happy. Oh, I missed him.
I think Tim, I don't know if he's going to try to come back.
He'll probably try to come back in.
Yeah.
He was earlier when we first started, but it only lasted about 15 seconds. And then there was
Oh.
another week he lost power completely and we lost the set.
Right. How are you, Flossie and Jeff, by the way?
I'm sorry?
fine,
How are
Rich.
you doing?
Great.
Good to see you and best to your man.
I will.
Are
Well,
you,
waiting to see if he comes back or
Yeah.
not. Oh, who's that?
There it
There
is.
he is.
You were frozen for a while, Tim.
but your loyal students are here.
Uh-oh, no
Howard is
sound.
on, but we don't have him. Are you new to the community or you live in Savannah?
I live in Savannah, but yeah, I'm new to, I'm actually moving back. So,
Where did you live in the interim?
so it was in San Diego.
Oh,
Coastal.
Nice place,
Close to the
nice
ocean.
place.
It's
That's it.
expensive.
Yes, it is expensive.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, but it's expensive.
well, welcome. I hope you
Right.
have
Thank you.
a wonderful synagogue.
Yeah.
All right,
We just-
everybody.
Want to say goodbye, Tim. That's what we're waiting for. And thank you.
Well, Shabbat Shalom to everybody.
Shabbat
Have
Shalom.
a good Shabbos and weekend. And if you're interested, we're doing Yom Kippur Tuesday night for the class. So hopefully you'll see some of you there. And of course, Torah study again next week, like we always do. So take care, everybody. Stay cool.
You
Stay
too.
safe. Stay healthy. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tim. Bye.
You're
Is
welcome.
Bye.
Tim, is that
Yes.
your last Tuesday class?
For a while, we're going to kind of suspend until after the high holy days.
After the
Right,
holidays? Okay.
And then we'll start picking them up after that. I'm working on some ideas for some classes after that. So
And what about Friday? That's going to keep
we're gonna
continuing.
keep going. Yeah, Torah study is Torah study. I mean, unless it's like a national holiday or something like that, where we can study Torah. There's nothing.
Right.
Okay, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
That-
Bye.
Bye.